When I am weak, then I am strong. To the world, this is nonsense. Power and strength are worshipped by most people, and weakness is despised above all things. I and you, we all like winners. Our culture, our country, our society are caught up with the idea of winning, succeeding, getting ahead, overcoming great obstacles. These are the ideas, these are the goals that society places on all people. We can see this as evidenced by our preoccupation with sports. I think most of you like football. I like soccer. We like to see our team win. We like to follow a winner. Not only in sports, but throughout all of life, we like to see and know about people who have won and succeeded. We like to read or watch stories on TV of people who have overcome great mental or physical obstacles, then making a success of their lives. There was a girl who was born to a single teenage mother in USA. She felt unwanted and was shuttled back and forth from her grandmother to her mother, and then to her father by the time she was 14. She lived in poverty and suffered abuse for years. She was beaten regularly by her grandmother. She was also lonely much of the time, and due to her family's poverty, conditions were very poor. At 6 years old, she went to live with her mother. Since her mother worked long hours as a maid, she was neglected. At 9 years old, she was left in the care of her 19-year-old cousin who raped her. She continued to suffer sexual abuse from other relatives, including her mother's boyfriend, until she was 13 years old, when she ran away from home. At 14, she became pregnant. The baby died shortly after birth. To make a long story short, she became a talk show host later. She was selected as the world's most powerful woman, and she has appeared on Time's 100 most influential list 10 times since 2004. The only person to have appeared on the list that many times. And from 2004 until 2010, she was ranked among the 50 most generous Americans, giving away nearly $400 million to educational courses. Do you know who I'm talking about? Yes. Oprah Winfrey. There are many people who live lives of quiet brokenness and frustration, sensing, feeling the strong cultural preoccupation with winning, getting ahead, and knowing they have given their all, they have tried, but cannot break out of their individual brokenness and have to live day in and day out with the consequences of this struggle. A paradox is taking place in their lives. A paradox which says those they are weak in the eyes of society, they are strong in God's eyes. Our lessons this morning speak of a paradox. They speak of being strong while being weak. A statement in our lesson from 2 Corinthians is a paradox. It says, "My grace is sufficient enough for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." How can a person have power when he or she is weak? According to our human standards, this is a paradox. But as we study our lessons this morning, we will see an element of truth to this statement about power in weakness. There is a paradox between the demands of our world and demands of our God. Our world calls us to be strong, to succeed, to be upward mobile by our God, but our God calls us to surrender, to be dependent on Him, to worry about our neighbor, to treat others with kindness, humility, and honesty. Yes, this is a paradox that has been around for a long, long time. Jesus was a paradox to the people in his time. His lifestyle, his birth, his death was a paradoxical statement of how God's power would be manifested on this earth. Jesus himself appeared weak to many of his contemporaries. They are expecting a kind of Superman. They anticipated spectacular signs and unmistakable evidence of his divinity. They saw only a carpenter's son, a local boy, a prophet without honor. Our text this morning says this of the people: where did this man get all this? What is the wisdom given to him? How does he perform miracles? In verse 3, isn't he the carpenter, the son of Mary, and the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us? Our text says, yet all the power of God came to expression in that weakness. The weakness of God proved mightier than the strength of man. Jesus didn't fit the image people had of the Messiah. They expected a mighty king after the fashion of King David, a man who would lead a mighty army, a man who would make this small nation of Israel strong and powerful, a leader who would defeat the Romans. But, they got a baby born in a stable, a carpenter's son who for approximately 30 years didn't even make a stir among the people. When Jesus did finally go about his ministry, he walked, he lived with outcasts, he ate with the sinners, he made enemies of the priests and the rulers. He had a band of only 12 men who were uneducated fishermen, or tax collectors, or religious radicals. He didn't say anything to the Romans, but talked to the house of Israel. He healed the people. He forgave sins. He made wine. He calmed the sea. He talked about the love the Father had for his children, and he said he was the Son of God. Jesus died because he didn't fit the expectation and did not have the value system the people of Israel expected. Jesus came as a servant to people. He came to show that God didn't want people of superhuman ability, but he wanted people who would believe in God's power for their lives. He showed that God wanted people who would live in this paradox. He showed that when you are weak, believing in God and not self, then you are really strong. Jesus lived the ultimate paradox. Paul says this morning, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. If we are true to ourselves, we must admit that we do live by the paradox. God's grace is sufficient for us when we have sinned, when we grieve, when we are tossed about by the circumstance of life. God's grace is sufficient for us. In our weakness moments, God's grace is sufficient for us. In my life, I have seen the power of God to work in my weakness. When I was having some severe difficulties in my life, especially for last 25 years in my life journey in Australia, I often thought everything was over for me. Many times I thought there was nothing I can do. I tried to fix everything with my own effort and ability and knowledge, but it didn't work at all. All I had wanted to do was something good. All I had wanted to do was to be a faithful servant of God, but the situation was more a terrible mess. Really. Then, walking through the mess, God picked me up, his crying son, hugged me and loved me and said, "No worry, Ducky. No worry, Ducky. I am with you now. I know you love me, and I want you to know how much I love you too." God worked in my weakness and helped me to feel his love and his presence, and gave me power and energy to keep going my journey here in Australia. Today, I can absolutely and definitely say God's grace is enough, sufficient for me, for his power is made perfect in weakness. My friends, our weaknesses, our hardships, and our troubles are not of themselves a blessing. They are real problems for us, and they can create problems for how we get along with others. But when we acknowledge our weaknesses and our needs and turn to God and ask for his help, instead of relying on our own skill and wisdom and strength to save us, then something profound happens in your life. We discover that God's grace is sufficient for us, and that his power is made perfect in our weakness, and almost always in ways we do not expect. That's how God deals with us. We try to do something good in life, but it turns into a mess. Our marriage gets all sticky, or we insult or find a friend, or we can't stand our job, or our health goes not well. Sometimes we just stand there in tears because we can't think of anything else to do. But friends, remember this. That's when God picks us up and loves us and forgives us. God says to all of us this morning, "My grace is enough, sufficient for you. For my power is made perfect in weakness." Amen. Amen.